apparently. Okay, we'll attend to that. But when somebody's here, are you hearing them well? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yes, yes. It's on yours. Sure. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. As Brad has mentioned, in about 2 weeks' time, we'll be celebrating Christmas. And the program that we are starting today is really the 12-day reflection process that builds up to Christmas. And this idea really came after I read a book called Trip to Bethlehem. I think we have it in our library. And it's written by Hypatia Hasbrook. Those who know her will know that she also wrote a book called The Handbook of Prayer, which is also a wonderful book, powerful book. So the process of this program is that we are going to really go deep with this trip to Bethlehem. You've all read the story, you came across it. I mean, I don't know how many times I've read the story of the birth of Christ. So you know the story. And for those who want to reread it, it's found in the scripture of Matthew and Luke. But the Matthew version is in chapter 1 from verses 18 onwards. So it really, that's the story. But how I'm going to approach the program is that today we'll really focus on the journey. We'll focus on the places. We'll focus on the symbols. We'll focus on the characters and the stages of the trip, so that we understand the framework within which these meditations are going to happen. And then tomorrow, I will then start sharing short videos, which are about 5 to 10 minutes, that really focuses on one stage. But the beautiful thing about this book is that it takes the story of the trip to Bethlehem, it links it with the 12 powers that we've been doing this year. So your power of renunciation, your power of wisdom, your power of understanding, all the powers are linked to this story of Bethlehem. So as we look at the structure, in your mind, just bear in mind that over the 12 days, you know, every day there'll be a focus on renunciation and a meditation, and some insights that have been shared by Hypatia Hasbrook. Now, how do you take part in the program? You take part in the program by simply watching the video and simply doing the meditation. So it's really an individual inner work. It's you know, so that we all lead busy lives. So you watch the video and then do what you need to do and what Spirit leads you. So so it's really about your spiritual journey. But I want to just do a quick recap of the story of Christ and just touching on the highlights that you all know. So and I noted that different Bibles have got different versions, but kind of the framework is there. So Joseph is engaged to Mary, who is a virgin. Angel Gabriel visits Mary, telling her that she will give birth to a child. This is the child of God, and she is to name this child Jesus. And Mary has been chosen to fulfill this big responsibility. Because now Joseph is engaged to Mary, God decided that, hey, this guy shouldn't be too insecure. Let's assure him as well. You know? So the angel also visited Joseph, and to tell him that, look, this is God's will, and we should carry on with the marriage. And round about that time, King Augustus who appears to be the king of the world at the time, issued an instruction that there should be a census. I think we did a census in about 2 or 3 years. And so the story then unfolds in Joseph and Mary being pregnant, having to take a trip to Bethlehem. And the reason why they're going to Bethlehem is that Bethlehem is the birthplace of Joseph, who is a descendant of King David. So I'm mentioning names so that later on when we unpack the names, it can all start to come together. The trip takes about 4 to 5 days. They get to Bethlehem, the place is full, they can't get any hotels. And then they find themselves in a stable where the child is born. There's some shepherds around looking for their sheep. They're visited by an angel who tells them that there's a king that's born, and then the shepherds go and find this family. And then the other component is that there's another king who's also powerful in the area, King Herod. He then sends people as well, the 3 wise men, to go here, because he says he wants to visit and send well wishes to this child, but his mission is to kill this person who's now the king, who's now the savior of the world. And then fortunately the 3 wise men choose another option and do not go back to King Herod. Last 2 points is that the king then sends an instruction that all boy children under 2 must be killed, and then Joseph and Mary and Jesus have to escape to Egypt. So that's kind of the framework in a nutshell. So we've recapped what the story is about, but the Christmas story is our story. The Christmas story from a unity perspective focuses on the Christ child that represents our higher self. The Christmas story focuses on the birthing of the God idea in us. That's where we take it to. Now, this story, because it includes a child, really is an invitation, it touches the heart. It calls for reflection. It calls for one to say, having heard this story many times, how then do I continue my journey of spiritual unfoldment today? And that is the reflection that is going to happen. So the challenge is that in our history, we essentially can interpret the story at 3 levels. The first and obvious one is the literal. So when we look at the story literally, the questions we are asking is who, what, where, how, and why, and all the drama that goes with that. So that is the level that we start with, and I think most of us have been there. The second level of interpretation is the moral level. Through the moral level, here the story becomes obedience to God. So Joseph and Mary had their own plans. God comes in, now they have to abide. And then there is a lesson in that way that follow God's instruction, just as Mary and Joseph abided by God's instruction. The level that I'm interested in is the metaphysical interpretation. And I'll talk a little bit shortly about what are the important considerations for a metaphysician. Okay. Now, when you look at the story metaphysically, we look at the implied lesson, not only from a psychological perspective, so there's a psychological perspective of it, but also from a spiritual perspective. We are required to look at various aspects of the story, the symbolism, and what those represent in our own consciousness. So the metaphysical interpretation is all about our consciousness and how we are learning from this story, using our skills of metaphysics. So in other words, metaphysics is an invitation to a mystical journey. And by that, I'm talking about the deep spiritual meaning of this story. And that mystical journey is really aimed at bringing forth our divinity and helping us to recognize the Christ within us. Now, I want to get into what's important for us as metaphysicians, right? The word metaphysics refers to any system of thought by which people try to discover truth. Okay. And so let me repeat that. Metaphysics refers to any system of thought by which people try to discover truth. So you can be a Christian metaphysician or any other path to discover that which is true. Now, our metaphysicians distinguish between facts and truth. The story of Bethlehem, as we read it, we can see a lot of facts. But as metaphysicians, we know that facts are situations, they're events, they're characters, they're places and things that happen in a story. Facts of a story are what we observe. It's what we see, it's what we hear, what we experience in a nutshell. Truth, on the other hand, is that which does not change. Truth is that which is invisible, that which is eternal, that which underlies everything that appears in the outer world or the world that we see it. So, for example, a fact made those years that the earth was flat, those facts changed. But the truth of accepting the oneness and the presence of God, that there's this presence that leads this order that we live in, that's unchanging. So sometimes facts coincide with truth, but the truth must always endure. So spiritual metaphysics is a search for the truth. It is a search for the truth as it applies to us humans. Truth as it applies to humanity's relationship with the source of all that is, the total cosmic process. In other words, that which we refer to as God. So as students of metaphysics, we are looking at that relationship of how we relate to the allness of life. And that is the journey here. That's the journey we follow when we come to Unity, to any other church, as we are taught spiritually, whether we are Buddhists, Islam, and so on. When we are into metaphysics, we are looking into the truth of that relationship. Now, when Christmas is your story, there are other important considerations that you must bear in mind, because we are using a story from the Bible. And I'm going to borrow the words of Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, and his demeanor to the Bible. Charles Fillmore says, the Bible is a story of you. The Bible is a story of you. He says that every chapter, every aspect, every story, every parable, all the characters, all the places, all the symbols represent stages in consciousness. Yes. So whether it is in the Garden of Eden or in Egypt, we at Unity, we look at it as a state of consciousness and what we can learn from that state of consciousness. So the emphasis is more on that deep meaning of the story that's in the Bible, and for you to have an inward reflection to say, what does this mean to you? So unity can never be a cult. I know you shared a cult before, because here you're expected to reflect, have a view, agree, disagree, be led by spirit into your own individual unfoldment. Yes. And this is the challenge with the story of Christmas. So when we take this story of Christmas, we reflect then, looking at it from that description by Charles Fillmore, about how this story describes our own individual spiritual evolution. So when a child is born in Bethlehem, what does that mean for Caleb and his spiritual evolution? And this is the process here. And these meditations then would simply be around, thinking about what it means to the individual. So when Christ is born, we ask ourselves, how is this story unfolding in my own consciousness? What is the spiritual idea of the birthing of Christ in my life? And that is the challenge with this program. Now I'm going to get into the elements of the journey and the places that are stated in this trip to Bethlehem. So now Mary and Joseph, when you recall the story, they leave Nazareth as a couple and return as a family. Okay. So now already there, we learn that this Christmas story, them initially starting in Nazareth and going to Bethlehem, is a process. It is a journey. Because they leave being engaged, Mary is pregnant, they return with the child. I know that when a child comes in, the focus is on the child. You now feel a lot more like a family. So those dynamic changes. And I think for me that was quite, a good reminder that them living as a couple and coming back as a family symbolizes the journey that underlies this story. The story illustrates the inner rebirth process through which the higher self emerges at the center of consciousness, becoming that integrated force. As a child, you become an integrated force that differentiates you when you're a couple and when you're a family. So this is what's in the story, and that is one way of reflecting into the story. Now, another aspect of the journey, the time and places, is that Christ's birth occurs at the time when Herod is the king. And I mentioned earlier that he then felt, if this Messiah is born, my power is threatened, and so on. Now, from a unity perspective, a king is a symbol for the ego. It is our personalized sense of our own identity. So who is the Herod in you? It is the ego. And here, the Herod has a long reign, and this often symbolizes that the ego is often entrenched over time, over long periods. And often, when the ego is strong, divine ideas can come, but our fear, our sense of identity, our sense of limitation, which are all aspects of the ego, are then constrained by this king called Herod, which is our ego. So that is another aspect to look at. So we don't say, hey, Herod was so bad. We say, what is the Herod in me? And that wants to kill this child. The divine idea that has been birthed through our journey of Christmas. So ideally the ego, or the small selves, should be serving the higher self. When the ego is serving the higher self, it's receptive. You know, one of the words in our manifesto is, I let go of playing small and step up. You know, it's not an egotistical statement. It is that commitment to saying, I'm led by Spirit and I'm receptive to the guidance of Spirit. So the ego evolves around our own concerns, just as Herod was concerned about his kingdom. And its primary concern is self-protection. So when I hear an idea and my ego is resisting, then we realize that, oh, okay, maybe here there is some work to be done. So Herod in the story is called the king of Judea, not the king of Israel. And that's significant because it shows that his reign is in the material, whereas Israel is an elevated state of thinking. So he's not king of Israel, he is the king that is preoccupied with materiality, showing that the ego is driven by the quests that are only limited to materiality. He wants to protect his kingdom, and he doesn't understand this Christ that is being born, and he wants to kill it based on his materialistic perspective of what's happening. It's also important that we heard that Joseph goes back to Bethlehem with Maria at a time when there is a world census. Now you recall with the census that we had that it is the counting of people. So we look into this, that what is the significance of this? Does it have any significance? The significance is as follows. Metaphysically, people represents our thoughts and feelings. When we are referring to people in a story, God's people, or people who have not followed the instructions of God, we are referring to those thoughts and feelings that are predominant in our consciousness. Now, the symbolism of a world census is that the beliefs or feelings that are gained from a material environment must be counted and must be called to account when there is a leader. I don't know if you're getting what I'm saying here. So there is a census, which is the counting of people. Now we don't take that literally. We say, because we know that people represents thoughts and beliefs, to go back to Bethlehem to do that counting means that those thoughts, those people that are in your head must be called to account when you are at a higher level of vibration. You can only count when you are in Bethlehem. And this is the symbolism of Joseph and Mary, not being counted in Nazareth, but being counted in Bethlehem, which is the place of substance, which is the house of bread. And that is the significance of that the birth of Christ comes when there is a world census. When Christ is born, the thoughts and feelings that are occurring at a material level are called to account. So how then the question is, how are my people, how are my thoughts being called to account this period and over the next 12 days and when this Christ child is born? Who must be counted? What thoughts, people, and feelings must be counted when this Christ idea is now being birthed in your life? That's what the next 12 days is about. Call your people to account. Look into those feelings that have been predominant in your consciousness and get into the silence that will reveal the Christ child that is born in you. So this is the invitation over the next 12 days. So continuing, looking now at places in the story. There are a number of places that are mentioned. When you read the story, you will come across them. There is Jerusalem, there is Nazareth, there is Bethlehem, there is Egypt. Jerusalem is a habitation of peace. That's the metaphysical meaning of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem in a Christmas story symbolizes that we must be in a peaceful state of mind in order to experience this spiritual empowerment. So that's our Jerusalem, a peaceful state of mind. So over the next 12 days, how is that going to happen within us? And that is then what we mentioned. Now, in the story, what's mentioned is that when Mary hears from the angel, she goes to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is in a hill town in Judah. Elizabeth and Zechariah live in a town in Judah, which symbolizes a high state of consciousness that's formed when you acknowledge and praise God. So the hill town of Judah is about praising God. So Mary gets visited by this angel. She goes to Elizabeth, who is in a space of praising and recognizing God. And that happens before herself. She goes to Bethlehem. And so this is now the symbolism that starts here. And because this is all playing in our consciousness, we then, how do I acknowledge and praise the allness of life, the allness of God in my own life? How do I go into that hill town of Judah? Because Mary and Joseph's story is my story as well. Now, they come from Nazareth. Nazareth, when you look up what it means, is that it means being guarded and being defended or being preserved. Now, Joseph and Mary have to leave Nazareth. In other words, they have to leave a place of being guarded, defended, or preserved, and go to Bethlehem, which is the house of sustenance. So again, here we see the evolution of spirit moving from the predominantly guarded ideas of lower consciousness to a higher state of Bethlehem, because Bethlehem, as I've mentioned, it represents a consciousness of the omnipresent substance of divine energy, a space where everything that we need in spirit is provided and is sustained. That's what Bethlehem is symbolizes. So we must then, in our own spiritual journey, move from the Nazareth to Bethlehem. That is this journey of spiritual evolution that takes place. The last place I want to just mention is Egypt. Now, what happens in the story is that after the child is born, the angel visits. Herod is now mad. He wants everyone to be killed, this child to be killed, and so on. So now the angel then visits Joseph and says, Joseph, take your wife and your child and go to Egypt. Now, we know that Egypt symbolizes the immense or human's animal nature. It's material, it's a lower plane. So now a child is born. Now, why then does it now drop down to Egypt? And that is another question that comes up when you explore this story. Now, the reason why this happens is that the family's escape to Egypt symbolizes that part of transformation, of our transformation process, where a divine idea has already been birthed, but we are still dealing with all these issues, the Herods and so on, the threats, and we are not yet confident or bold enough to let this child grow. Now, you then escape to Egypt, which is more material, but the child is still there. And what happens in the story is that when Joseph and Mary hear that Herod is now dead, they can now then leave Egypt and go into a state of higher consciousness. So Egypt does have its role, and sometimes when we get divine ideas, we shouldn't beat ourselves up when we retreat into a state of Egypt. We must know it's all part of the process. This is important because here in Unity, I've heard many times, but I'm a student, how, then you pick yourself up for marriage, I know better, Now, the symbolism that's coming here is that give yourself a break. Yeah. The child has been born. You are retreating to Egypt for some safety, but the child is growing. And at the right time, you will then find your rightful place in higher consciousness. So let us not beat ourselves up when we've forgotten a principle or something has gone wrong that we should have known better because we are Unity students. I'm now going to enter into the second last part, which is the symbols and that are in the story. And, again, today it's really just around understanding the framework so that when we do the meditations, when a symbol comes up, then we already kind of know how it fits in the whole picture. So the two symbols I want to focus on here is the feminine and male attributes, because the story, the main characters is Mary and Joseph. So the feminine attributes talks about the soul, which, what the book says is that it is passive but receptive. So when anytime there is a feminine character in the Bible, we know then that soul work is happening. Now, because this is a story about Mary, we know that the Christmas story is a soul process. If it doesn't include a soul process, then it's not complete. So that is what's happening here. And it's, the story reminds us, because the soul is passive but receptive, we need to be passive and receptive. Passive in the sense that, maybe in your state of meditation, the state of being receptive to divine ideas, the state of letting divine ideas unfold through you. That is the soul processing that needs to happen. So when you hear that the shepherds saw stars, your soul then needs to then be silent and receptive to what that can reveal to your own process. So that, so the feminine attributes is inviting us to be receptive and to listen to what the divine ideas are unfolding in us. The main attributes, Joseph, the nurturer, the provider, the protector. And this is also important in terms of how we manage our own space. We must still carry on with life and do what needs to be done once we go through this process. And that is the element that is also important. You don't all sit the whole day and meditate. And, we need to go vibrate. I'm still meditating. We must also be practical. Yeah. And this is because we are divine beings having a human experience. We must participate in the human experience. Now, the last aspect I want to focus on is the characters. And there are quite a number of characters here, and I think it's important to just, confirm what they represent. In this story, there's a lot of, there is angels. Gabriel is one of the angels that features prominently. Angels represent messages from God, divine ideas. So we don't take it literally. We say, oh, an angel appeared, oh, so there was a message of God that took place. So that's how then it is a divine idea that comes to you could be called an angel or a message of God. So in other words, angels represents a communication with the spiritual source of being. Gabriel in particular symbolizes the wisdom of allowing our Christ nature to emerge. And Gabriel also represents the integrative aspects of consciousness. So he has to integrate what's happening between Mary and Joseph. And so he also has that integrative element to it. Mary represents the purified soul. She represents the feeling nature functioning in positive ways. Mary being young suggests vitality and infinite possibilities. Virginity represents purity or purified soul. Important, purified soul. And this means that Mary, and the words that are used here is that Mary represents one who is not adulterated by duality or error of any kind. So it's in fact, when I read this, I just, it took me to the first principle of unity, which is God is all there is. If you believe in duality, then you are preoccupied with hell, Satan, and all that, the other power that's alternative to God. So Mary represents that one who doesn't hold duality of any kind, but is focused on the one source and the one life. Joseph represents the one who Jehovah will add to. And the fact that he is of a lineage of David, that represents the divine love that is individualized in human consciousness. Okay? So Joseph has all those connotations. He's a nurturer, he's a provider, God will add to him. He's also the lineage of divine love, but Joseph also represents divine wisdom. So those are the characters. The other characters that are in the story is Jesus. So Jesus represents who Jehovah is. So the divine idea was then birthed, the allness of God was then birthed as this character called Jesus. The book says Jesus represents deliverance, safety, salvation, provider, helper, all that God is. That is the symbolism of Jesus. So when we say in the name of Jesus, we are essentially saying in the nature of God. In that nature, when we affirm those words, then we are aligning ourselves with the allness of life, with the allness of God, which is also individualized through each one of us as manifestations of spirit. Shepherds. The shepherds in the story are forces in the story that are there to protect and guard. And they're about human virtues, human love and so on. So whatever we hold dear and we want to protect, we know that then the shepherds are at play. And those virtues are represented by the sheep, which are vulnerable. So what you want to protect is then looked after by the shepherds. So the shepherds also mean thoughts that are faithful to God. That's another meaning of it. So they have that archetype of being a guardian to our living. And then the three wise men represents wisdom and the stored up resources of the soul. So when the soul is going through a process, you find that sometimes I didn't know I had that resilience, or Spirit just leads you through what you need to go through. So that is the symbolism of the three wise men from the east. They do have yes, the King Herod can have a role, but there is wisdom there. I mean, they decided not to take the message back of where the child is. So they represent that wisdom and that stored up resources on the soul. That's what it is. And I will share this, the notes in the group so that if you want to refer to them. So now what the book does is that it breaks down the various stages. And I won't go into the 12 stages. I'll just highlight a few. But why that is important is that this is where there is a link with the 12 powers. Now, let me pause and talk a little bit about the 12 powers. As students of Unity, we know that one of the basic teachings is that is that of the 12 powers. The 12 powers are represented by the 12 disciples that Jesus the Christ had. John, who represents love, James, who represents wisdom, and so on. So now the stages of the trip also has 12 steps. And what now happens, and you'll see over the next 2 days, is the merging of this trip to Bethlehem, this birthing of the Christ, with our 12 powers, with our power of will, power of order, power of love, power of faith, and how those are then developed through the 12 steps that lead to the birth of Christ. So that is the thinking here. And this is one of the things that the book takes you through, to say, then this is also, the birthing of Christ is also about the strengthening of your 12 powers, your power of life, your power of renunciation, your power of will, your power of zeal. This process is also about that. So, but all of that will then, this is why then we have to have daily videos, of 5 to 10 minutes. We'll talk about the power, what the power is, what are some of the insights as shared by the book, and then a short meditation, probably 3 to 5 minutes of meditation. And then afterwards, you're welcome to just take notes and say what came up for you. Maybe I'm hoping next week Sunday in time to just maybe have a short reflection of the days that will have taken place this week. So in conclusion, this you can imagine how long this has taken. So, because, we really needed to get the framework, and the more I read, then the spec will come and then you can't just go through it. You need to edit and it needs work, and so on. And I think this is why I love this image of Unity and the licensed teachers or ministers that are described as waiters, because waiters don't cook the food, and whoever is a licensed Unity teacher or minister or whoever are not cooking the food of divine substance. That comes through God, through Spirit. When we share ideas, it's really the waitressing process as divinely inspired. So whenever I have a situation, it's on offer, and just for us to facilitate the spirit, the process of worship and process of spiritual evolution. That's really what the process is about. So in conclusion, we are reminded that each one of us is chosen to express the image of God. We are chosen to express the God within, the life, the intelligence that lies as potential, just as the Christ child is being born in us in this journey to Bethlehem. we are also reminded that we are eternally connected to the source. Even when Joseph and Mary didn't have a place to stay, they were provided for. Gifts came, the divine ideas came, and they were provided for. We are also reminded that in our design, we are designed to fulfill the higher self. This Christ child has to grow in us. It has to grow. We shouldn't limit this child. We also learn that God is absolutely free. And God is absolutely available to us. We just need to go with it. We need to just align ourselves because God is absolutely free.
Yes. Amen.
We also are reminded that the likeness of God within us, or expressing the likeness of God within us, is our choice. Joseph could have chosen not to go back to Bethlehem. Mary could have said, no, God, wait. Let me first get married and then choose somebody else, to give birth to this child. So we have choice as students of truth. And we have that freedom to recognize and express our godly nature. And like God, we have infinite potential. We have infinite possibilities to express our godly nature. We have the power of choice on whether we are going to allow the Christ in us to have full expression and to become alive in us. And that is the invitation for the next 12 days as we build up to Christmas. That is an invitation to all of us to let the Christ Spirit have its way as us and in each one of us. Thank you very much.
Oh, give him some love.
Yeah, boy.